People often assume that avoidant partners simply move on. They look calm, composed, unbothered. They convince you and sometimes even themselves that the breakup doesn't touch them. But here's the truth most people never hear. Avoidants feel deeply. They just don't process those feelings out loud or even consciously at first. And when an avoidant starts missing you, the signs are subtle but powerful. You won't hear confessions, you won't get dramatic texts, but their behavior shifts in ways they can't hide. Today, I want to show you 5 unmistakable signs your avoidant ex is missing you like crazy, and why these signs appear. Because once you understand the psychology underneath, everything starts making sense. When an avoidant ex reappears in your life, it rarely looks like what most people expect. They don't send long emotional texts, they don't confess regret, and they don't suddenly transform into someone who can speak openly about their feelings. Instead, their return is quiet, indirect, almost hidden between the lines, and yet this is one of the strongest indicators that they're missing you far more than they let on. Avoidants have a complicated relationship with desire. They want connection, but the moment they feel it too strongly, they also feel the pull to distance. So when they start to miss you, they don't reach out in a straightforward way. They test the emotional temperature from afar. They might view your social media stories within seconds, or they might accidentally like a very old picture of yours, something they had no business scrolling back far enough to see. Maybe they send a random emoji, a link to something related to a conversation you had months ago, or a casual message like, "Hey, did you ever get that thing sorted out?" None of these are random. They're signals. Small, subtle, and safe signals that let them feel connected without taking emotional risks. For an avoidant, direct communication is threatening because it forces them to acknowledge their emotional vulnerability, and vulnerability for them often feels like loss of control. So instead of walking through the front door, they peek through the window. They want to see if you're still receptive, still open, still emotionally available, without exposing themselves to the possibility of rejection. What looks like a meaningless check-in is actually a test. This is how avoidants try to manage the tension between missing you and protecting themselves. If they truly didn't care, you would never hear from them again. Avoidants are masters at disappearing when they feel disconnected. So when they come back in any form, even the smallest breadcrumb, it's because something inside them is pulling them toward you. Their indirect approach is also tied to their fear of misinterpreting your reaction. They don't want to risk misreading your tone or your intentions. A meme, a video, or a random question gives them the ability to gauge your energy without exposing their own. If you respond coldly, they can retreat without feeling rejected. If you respond warmly, they take it as the green light they were hoping for. This dance of distance and closeness is how avoidants regulate emotional safety. They want to feel you near, but not so close that the intensity becomes overwhelming. Another important aspect is timing. Avoidants tend to reach out right when you've stopped chasing, stopped explaining, or stopped trying to pull them back. That shift in your behavior creates emotional space, and that space makes them feel your absence. It reminds them of what you brought into their life, your warmth, your emotional grounding, your presence. When they reappear indirectly, it's because they're trying to reconnect without confronting the underlying feelings that scared them before. It's not lack of interest, it's fear, wrapped in subtle gestures, and ironically, the softer and more casual their attempt to reconnect looks, the more it reveals how deeply they miss you. Avoidant individuals rarely feel the full weight of missing someone immediately after a breakup. In fact, the first emotional wave they experience is usually relief. Not relief because they didn't care, but relief because the intensity of emotional closeness has lifted, and they can finally breathe without feeling overwhelmed. For them, space equals safety. But what they don't realize in that initial moment is that relief is temporary. And once the nervous system settles, once life goes back to routine, once the noise fades, the absence starts to echo. It sneaks up on them quietly. At first, they're simply moving through their daily habits, work, distractions, hobbies, surface-level connections, but then they notice something missing. A feeling, a voice, a presence that used to anchor their world more than they ever acknowledged. That's when the awareness of your absence truly begins. Avoidants tend to suppress emotional discomfort, burying it under logic or busyness. So when the memories start to return, they often come disguised. A song you both liked, a place you visited together, a small ritual you created, a phrase you always said. These memories hit them not because they're trying to reminisce, but because the brain naturally fills emotional voids with familiar connections. They don't plan to miss you, they stumble into it. And when they do, it feels confusing and inconvenient for them. They're not comfortable with longing, so the sensation feels intrusive. But the longer they sit with the silence, the stronger the awareness becomes. Your absence becomes a contrast to the comfort they once had with you, even if that comfort scared them. What often intensifies this awareness is the realization that no one else brings the emotional stability or understanding you offered. Avoidants don't trust easily, so forming deep bonds with new people isn't simple for them. When they lose someone who provided emotional security, someone who accepted them, understood them, didn't pressure them, they often don't realize the value until the connection is gone. So as they move through conversations and interactions with others, they instinctively compare. Notice the way you listened, the way you made them feel grounded, the way you helped them express emotions they otherwise suppress. That sense of emotional safety isn't easy to replicate, and when they can't find it elsewhere, the absence becomes even heavier. Another powerful trigger is routine. If you were a part of their daily rhythm, texting in the morning, sharing small updates, spending weekends together, your absence disrupts those patterns. Avoidants thrive on predictable structures because unpredictability feels unsafe. When those familiar patterns vanish, they start to feel unbalanced, even if they don't consciously link it to missing you. They experience a kind of emotional disorientation, an internal void they can't quite name, and eventually they recognize where that feeling is coming from. This delayed missing is one of the most confusing parts for avoidants. They don't miss you because you begged for them, chased them, or tried to prove your worth. They miss you when you're gone, when your energy withdraws, when your presence is no longer available to them. That's when the emotional truth hits them, slowly, quietly, but undeniably. And it's this hyper-awareness of your absence that often pulls them back into your orbit, even if they don't have the courage to admit it. One of the most revealing signs that an avoidant ex is missing you is their sudden, almost obsessive monitoring of your life from the shadows. Avoidants pride themselves on emotional control, control over their reactions, their attachments, and especially their vulnerability. But when they start missing you, that self-control begins to crack in ways they don't anticipate. They won't admit it, and they won't act like someone longing for connection, but their curiosity betrays them. They start watching you more than they ever did when you were together, not because they're ready to reconnect openly, but because they want to feel close to you without risking emotional exposure. It usually starts online. They begin checking your social media profiles far more often than they'd ever acknowledge. They look at your stories almost immediately, sometimes at odd hours, because late nights and quiet moments are when suppressed emotions slip through the cracks. They scroll through your pictures, revisit old posts, analyze your captions, and silently observe who interacts with your content. They do all this from a distance because it allows them to feel connected without confronting the fear that held them back before. If an avoidant is missing you, they are keeping tabs on you, even if they've blocked you or gone silent. They find ways. They use alternate accounts, mutual friends, or subtle methods to satisfy the longing they refuse to name. This monitoring often intensifies when they sense that your energy has shifted. When you stop chasing, stop explaining, stop trying to reconnect, avoidants get triggered in ways they rarely understand. The absence of your attention creates emotional tension inside them. They start wondering what you're doing, who you're talking to, and whether someone else is stepping into the space they once occupied. Their fear of being emotionally engulfed may have pushed them away, but the fear of losing you to someone new wakes up attachment feelings they thought they had under control. So they check your profile again. They read between the lines. They look for any clue that tells them whether you're still emotionally accessible. Even if they claim not to care, their actions say otherwise. They might ask mutual friends about you, pretending it's casual curiosity. They may bring your name up in random conversations or show an unusual interest when someone mentions you. All of this is reconnaissance. emotionally safe information gathering. G. They need to know where you stand before they risk taking any steps forward. Their monitoring is a way to maintain a connection without opening themselves up to disappointment or rejection. Avoidants also tend to romanticize from afar. Watching you move through your life helps them process emotions they couldn't handle when you were close. It allows them to miss you in a controlled environment where there's no immediate pressure to act. The more they watch, the more they start to feel. Seeing you happy or growing can stir up a mix of longing, regret, and fear. Seeing you distant or moving on can trigger jealousy or a renewed desire to reconnect. They feel these reactions intensely, even if they bury them underneath logic or detachment. Ultimately, this quiet monitoring is their way of staying connected while protecting their emotional safety. They want to know you're still there, still familiar, still within reach. And the irony is that the more an avoidant misses you, the less likely they are to show it directly. Instead, they watch you from the background, hoping to feel close enough to ease their longing, but distant enough to keep their fears at bay. Nothing activates an avoidant ex's hidden feelings like seeing you move forward without them. It's one of the most powerful emotional triggers they experience, often because it disrupts the sense of control and emotional safety they rely on. Avoidants convince themselves that distance protects them, that stepping back keeps things calm, predictable, manageable. When you were available, when you texted first, checked on them, showed care, they felt secure in knowing they could return whenever they wanted. But the moment that energy shifts, the moment you stop filling the emotional space they took for granted, something inside them wakes up. It's not a conscious decision, but a psychological reaction, deeply rooted in their attachment patterns. Avoidants tend to downplay the importance of the connection when it's present. They minimize their own attachment needs because acknowledging them feels threatening. But they don't realize how much emotional support you provided until it disappears. When you start healing, growing, or simply living your life without constantly revolving around them, their internal balance is disrupted. They feel a subtle panic, not dramatic, not expressed out loud, but powerful enough to shake their sense of emotional control. They start questioning what's happening, why you're pulling away, and whether they misjudged your importance in their life. This often shows up as irritation, confusion, or sudden curiosity about what you're doing. Seeing you happy, confident, or even neutral stirs something inside them. Avoidants expect you to remain emotionally anchored where they left you. When you don't, it challenges their belief that they can detach without consequences. Your growth becomes a mirror reflecting what they've lost or what they failed to nurture. Even simple changes, like a new hobby, new people around you, a glow up in your appearance, or an improvement in your emotional state, can trigger them. These signs of progress remind them that life is moving on without their presence. A part of them starts to wonder whether they misread the situation, whether they underestimated your strength, or whether letting go wasn't as safe and simple as they convinced themselves it would be. Nothing hits them harder than the possibility of someone else entering your life. Avoidants may shy away from closeness, but they don't like being replaced. The idea that someone new could offer you comfort, attention, or connection triggers deep-seated fears of inadequacy and loss. Even if they were the one who pulled away, the thought of you giving your emotional energy to a person creates an emotional jolt they can't ignore. Suddenly, the distance they needed so desperately begins to feel like a threat. They start monitoring you more closely, replaying memories, comparing themselves to imagined scenarios, and wondering if they made a mistake. This emotional activation isn't always obvious on the surface. Avoidants don't usually express jealousy openly or reach out with clear vulnerability. Instead, they show subtle shifts, liking posts they previously ignored, reacting defensively, reaching out under the guise of something practical, or acting unusually attentive. These behaviors reveal an internal conflict, their desire for independence fighting against the fear of truly losing you. And that tension is exactly what pulls their suppressed feelings to the surface. Your progress forces them to confront emotions they've avoided, making them realize your absence in a way they were never prepared for. When an avoidant ex starts missing you, the last thing they will do is come back with a raw, open declaration of their feelings. That level of emotional exposure feels too risky for them. Instead, they approach you in sideways, indirect, carefully measured ways. They want connection, but they fear the vulnerability that comes with admitting it. So they try to rebuild the bond without ever labeling it as such. This creates a confusing mix of signals. They reach out, but with no real clarity. They show interest, but avoid depth. They take steps forward only to stop before things get too emotionally intense. And yet, despite all this defensive behavior, their actions reveal something undeniable. They are trying to reconnect. Avoidance sends safe signals when they miss you. These signals are deliberately low stakes, a check-in message disguised as casual concern, a shared meme that references an inside joke, a comment on something trivial from your life, or a question they could easily find the answer to on their own. These are not meaningless gestures. They are attempts to reopen a channel of communication without feeling exposed to rejection or emotional pressure. If they can get you talking, if they can feel your warmth even for a moment, it soothes their internal discomfort. But they want to do it without stepping into the vulnerability that scared them in the first place. Underneath these behaviors is a deep internal conflict. When avoidants miss someone, they experience longing, but that longing is immediately followed by fear. Fear of being overwhelmed, fear of depending too much on someone, fear of losing control. This creates a push and pull dynamic inside them. They reach for closeness, then hesitate. They want reassurance, but don't want to ask for it openly. They want emotional safety, but fear emotional intimacy. So instead of saying, I miss you, they say things like, hey, I saw something that reminded me of you, or thought I'd check in, or how have you been? These comments might appear simple, but for an avoidant, they represent a huge emotional step. Their behavior often includes nostalgia as well. They might bring up a memory, reference something you used to do together, or remind you of a moment that held meaning for both of you. Nostalgia is their way of reconnecting emotionally, but at a distance. By focusing on the past, they can be vulnerable without dealing with the vulnerability of the present. It is safer to talk about what was than to admit what is. And they hope that by revisiting these memories, you will open the door for deeper connection without them having to ask. Avoidants also rely heavily on testing. They want to know if you're still available, still receptive, still emotionally open to them. They pay close attention to how quickly you respond, how warm your tone is, whether you seem indifferent or engaged. Your reactions determine their next step. If they sense warmth, they feel safer and may move slightly closer. If they sense distance, they retreat to protect themselves. This dance is their way of balancing desire with fear. Ultimately, these small attempts at reconnection are their version of reaching out with emotion. Carefully, cautiously, and with the least amount of vulnerability possible, they are drawn back to the connection because they miss the emotional stability, acceptance, and understanding you once provided. But they approach it slowly so they don't feel overwhelmed. Every subtle effort, every breadcrumb, every disguised message is their way of saying, I still want you in my life. I'm just afraid to show how much. In the end, understanding these signs isn't just about figuring out whether your avoidant ex misses you. It's about recognizing the emotional patterns that shape the relationship in the first place. When you see their mixed signals, their subtle returns, and their silent longing, you realize that their distance was never a lack of feeling, but a struggle with expressing it. And once you understand that, you can choose your next step with clarity, strength, and self-respect. Thank you for listening, for showing up for your own growth, and for giving yourself the space to learn, heal, and move forward with confidence.